This is the final installment of a 6-part series on eating 6 unique meals for only $2.50 a day. The rules are simple. For this week, I could only consume food that I bought at the beginning of the week for $15, though I allowed myself reasonable amounts of spices. I've released a video every day for these past 6 days. If you haven't seen any of these, I have left a link to day 1 in the video description. Alright, we made it to the final day. Before I cook this last meal, let's go over what I have left. 249 grams of my enriched sandwich loaf, 50 tablespoons of butter, 52.7 grams of clarified butter, 2.1 kilograms of potatoes, 1.1 kilograms of flour, 14 ounces of crushed tomatoes, 6 eggs, and 1 packet of yeast. Seeing as I liked the breakfast theme so much yesterday, I decided to go all out on this meal, with eggs in the basket, regular fried eggs, and a potato roasty with homemade ketchup. Now I needed 3 slices of bread for my eggs in the basket, so I had to cut off the remaining end of the loaf. Seeing as I only have 5 tablespoons of butter left, that left me with nothing to coat this hunk of bread with. Oh well. As for the ketchup, I was really just kind of winging it. I poured the remaining crushed tomatoes into a sauce pot, along with a 1/4 cup of water. I set my stove to medium-low to get that heating up. To the tomatoes, I added 3 tablespoons of white vinegar, a pinch of salt, a couple cranks of black pepper, a shake of garlic powder, some onion powder, and lastly, a sprinkle of MSG. I just mixed that up and brought it to a gentle simmer. I let that go for about 45 minutes until I had reduced by half. Then I passed it through a strainer into a bowl, making sure to pass as much of it through as possible. I then discarded the tomato solids and tossed the ketchup in the fridge to cool. The next order of business was the roasty, and basically the preparation is similar to how you would make hash browns. I peeled 750 grams of my potatoes, then grated them on my cheese grater, doing my best not to take off any of my fingertips. This wasn't too bad, only taking about 4 minutes in total. This done, I took a large kitchen towel and dumped my potato strips on it. Then, starting from one end, I rolled up the towel tightly, in order to squeeze out as much liquid as possible. I then let that sit for a bit as I went back to the stove, where I set a large cast iron pan and turned the heat to medium-high. Into the pan, I placed the rest of the clarified butter/ghee that we made on day 2, and just let that melt as the pan came up to temperature. Once that was nice and hot, I carefully dropped in the shredded potato. Now, over the next few minutes, I paid careful attention to the smell coming off the bottom of the pan, and once I detected the first hint of burning, I went ahead and flipped it. Now, I'm not brave enough to try flipping this in the pan, so I did the old 2-plate trick. First, I loosened up the bottom by shaking the pan, then making double sure with a rubber spatula. Then I inverted the pan onto a plate. Now some of the potato did stick, so I had to get that off, but regardless, the bottom did look pretty good. I then took another plate, inverted the roasty again, and then finally inverted back into the pan. Now if I had any more ghee, I would have added it in at this point, but unfortunately this second side will have to brown in the residual oil. The second side will only take a couple of minutes, so in that time I got the eggs going in a non-stick skillet. To this I added 2 tablespoons of the butter and let that melt on medium heat for about a minute, before adding in my 3 pieces of bread with 3 holes cut in the center for the eggs, which I will then crack into the center of each after about a minute and a half to let the toast start. While those get going, the roasty smells about done, so one last time I inverted the pan onto a plate. Not as impressive that time. Oh well, that's probably because of the lack of oil. Back at the eggs, they aren't quite done. At this point, I like to add a bit of salt and black pepper. Once those are ready, you can see the white is almost entirely set. I flip them over, adding another tablespoon of butter to the pan. And aren't those just things of beauty? Really looking forward to these. To finish them, I just sprinkled on a little bit more salt and pepper before removing to a plate. Finally, I added my final 2 tablespoons of butter to an already warm pan and cracked in my last 3 eggs. Unfortunately broke one of them, but that happens sometimes. A little bit of salt and pepper, then flip them over once the whites were set. 1 more minute of cooking, and we are done for the week. Time to plate up, one last time. And here is the final meal of the week, a veritable feast with tons of butter and eggs that I've just been missing all week. I of course had to start with the roasty, and man, for my first time, this was really good. It was basically a big hash brown, and with that homemade ketchup, it was even better. Speaking of which, that ketchup was tangy, tomatoey, and ever so slightly too loose. I probably should have let it simmer for another 10 minutes or so. As for the eggs in the basket, it was amazing. I've always loved these as a kid, and this did not disappoint. I'm just going to finish this in the other room while we look at the final macros. Unsurprisingly, this was the largest, most caloric meal of the week, coming in at more than 2,800 calories, pretty much a maintenance day for me. As for the protein, it was also the highest of the week at 75 grams. That was pretty good by this week's standard, but that leads into my first big takeaway from this week. The overall protein content was very low. The average for the week was 56 grams, which is coincidentally the minimum recommended by WebMD. But as any fitness coach will tell you, that is simply not enough if you are in any way athletic or trying to build muscle. Now, we saw at the beginning of this series that we could have extracted 80 grams of protein per day, mostly from the flour, but that would have disproportionately increased our calories by doing so. One thing I could try is isolating the wheat protein from the flour, but that would have taken a large time commitment for a relatively low return. Speaking of time, that was the next big takeaway. I spent so much time making these meals. Enough that I would say this lifestyle is unsustainable for the vast majority of people. Think about it this way. I spent an average of 3 hours cooking and cleaning every night this week. For that time, I could have worked an additional hour, spent $15 a night on high-quality ingredients or even fast food, and had some extra time left over. Or if that wasn't an option, I could have spent that $15 on just ingredients for a large casserole or a hearty soup, and eaten that all week. Finally, despite these shortcomings, this was a ton of fun. From planning the meals to figure out what weird ways I could use ingredients, to the actual experience of cooking in a limited environment. I loved every second of this. With that said, this was a ton of work, especially in writing 6 scripts and editing the gigabytes of footage I took every night. I'll definitely do one of these again, maybe towards the end of the new year, but for now, I am more than ready to get back to the regular form videos. Let me know below any suggestions or tips you have for next time, and once more, I would like to express my thanks for 200 subscribers. That's far more than I thought I would ever get in my first year of doing this. So a heartfelt thanks to every one of you, and have a great 2023.